How you doing?
Doing good. Good.
We didn't have to have a effect or adjustment there in our main comp. It had to be in the main comp or pre-comp, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
As long as it's got it, come on.
I'm just making sure.
Sure. That's good. That makes sense.
Does the expression have to do anything?
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to
I'm
do
just kidding.
something. Jeez. An expression that does nothing. That expression is one. It's a constant. That would be a weird expression. I don't know why anybody would do that, but I wouldn't put it past them. What an empty class. What am I supposed to do with you guys? Start on time? Yeah? End early? No. See, it's the flip side, man. I start late, I end late, you know? Start on time. You're like, start on time, Randy. Get it over this. All right. So, all right. So we're good on that. I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things. I'm sure all of you know about in 2 weekends this is happening, right? Yeah. It's not that far away. I don't know. Is anybody got film in here? No. All right.
Jared, but he's not here.
Well, not yet anyway. So cool. I'm trying to work my schedule to be there for at least part of the day. I was there for 2 programs last year and really enjoyed the program. I mean, it's how many of you guys have ever been to this? Just never? Oh yeah, you got to go. It's you will not be disappointed in the quality of the work. Mike and his programmers do a fantastic job of getting the Mike Traina of programming this. And so, generally speaking, if he says that the content's good, content is good. So, all right. When you have a chance, I don't have any specific content we're going to go through tonight. So once we finish up with the Q&A stuff, we'll start to. Well, I got some slides and other things, and then we'll veer off into kind of a survey of bits and pieces. So whatever you guys are interested in, we can always go back and look at old techniques again. If you guys want to try something again, we can certainly do that. Or we'll do somewhat of a survey of some of the effects that are out there in After Effects that you guys can screw around with. So and part of it will be like the one that I mentioned previously was we'll fool around with fractal noise and see what other trouble we can get into. So okay, yeah, that's that. Any questions to start off with? No? Yes, maybe. Okay. So cool. Let's do our song and dance. So without further ado, when I, lowercase I, was applying the rotobrush onto the layer, it was still frozen, but still did a brush stroke of some sort. Is this the same as what I was supposed to be doing, or is it just a different way? I think that this was referring to the fact that when you freeze, we didn't really talk about this in when we talked about rotobrush, but the way to, if you just use rotobrush on footage and you leave that effect in place, After Effects is going to compute the mat for that, the alpha mat for that ongoing. Okay, the way to kind of lock it in so that it behaves like it's not going to, if you know that it's not going to change again, there's a button that you can click on the view called Freeze that will basically render those mats. So they'll become hard rendered settings. And then if you want to make any changes at that point, you have to unfreeze it. And I believe that was part of that was mentioned in the lesson. But so the answer, at least the one that I figured out, was that the rotobrush will still paint. Even though it's frozen, you can still draw, and you'll see the little green stroke going on there, but it doesn't actually apply anything to the effect. So it's kind of like a do nothing. And the notice that you should kind of keep your eyes open for is this one that will basically show up at the bottom of that footage, that layer window. It says rotobrush and refine edge propagation is frozen, and if you want to do any changes, you have to unfreeze it. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Are there boy man, typos, I swear. Are there any tricks to speed up the rotoscoping process? A few that came to mind are, the first would be to shoot your roto subject against a background that allows for easier rotoscope. So now that is, and I'm trying not to be too cavalier about that, but if you guys played with the seagull footage that we had last week, you know exactly how easy it is to make rotobrush work very accurately, very easily. It took almost no effort to roto that sequence. And part of the reason why it was so successful was the background was significantly different in color and in contrast from the subject matter. So if you have that advantage and you shoot that way, you're going to get a better outcome. It's also another one of these, you want to get a nice crisp outline of your subject. Things like motion blur are not your friend at that point, so think about faster shutter speed and making sure that each frame is very, very clean and crisp and sharp. So that's number one. Number two is when you're using when you're doing rotoscope, it really is key to focus on just one part of the mat at a time. So if you were doing this traditionally in rotoscope, you would start by focusing on one thing that you're rotoscoping, whether that's a foot, a hand, an arm, a leg, a face, an airplane, or the fuselage of an airplane, or the wing of an airplane, or the missile, or the tail section. You get the idea. Is like you focus on one shape at a time and work that through all the way to completion. Then you work on the next piece of that and work it all the way through to completion. So that works the same for rotobrush as it does for classical rotoscope. Is that if you can do the rough brush strokes to capture your subject in the basic rotobrush mat, but there's nothing to say that if you want to refine it or if you want to fine tune it, you should still follow that same process. So focus on one part of the mat at a time while you're doing your roto. That way you make sure that part is exactly what you want it to look like. Because what invariably happens is, and we see that in all of my demos because I kind of doing them wild and loose, is that if you don't pay very, very close attention to the entire mat as you're working on it frame by frame, your eyes will start to get exhausted and you'll start missing things. So if you're very, very intentionally looking at detail, very close parts of the mat that you're working on, you're gonna get it, and it's gonna look fine throughout, and it'll have less ripple, less noise, less all this other stuff. So, and then finally, do edge refinement and mask feathering last, so that you're not overtaxing your computer with these fine details that you don't need when you're just roughing in the roto. So I know that sounds, when I talk about focusing on one part of the mat at a time, I know that sounds like that doesn't speed things up, but it does, because invariably, unless you want it to look like crap, if you want it to look like crap, you can get roto done really quick. I mean, it's super simple, right? But if you want it to look, reasonably good, you have to spend some amount of time. There's no fast rotoscoping tool. The fastest one that we have available to us right now is the RotoBrush. We'll talk about another one in a second, though, so because you guys came up with good questions this week. When using refined edges brush, if I see that an area is not well selected, can I go back into the RotoBrush at that point, or would that cause complications? The short answer is you can do that because it is a rabbit hole. So furthermore, actually, you can always go back in and reorder these strokes. The effect itself is kind of weird that way. You probably don't want to do that. If you do go back and switch back to the RotoBrush, the main RotoBrush, and do some touch-ups, it's no problem. You might have to. You might end up having to do a refine edge over top of that again, in which case you could go back into the effect and find the stroke or the refine edge stroke that was in there and remove it. It's, your mileage may vary at that point. So I mean, it's the effect is pretty forgiving from one perspective, but every time you add a stroke to that effect, you're giving your computer hints as to how best to mask the subject that you want to knock out the background from. So the more you do that, the more your computer has to work at it, and so every stroke ends up costing you a little bit more time in terms of how fast the process works. What can be done to smooth the edges during rotoscoping so that your final result is not so jumpy from frame to frame? So the two things that you're looking for under the effect inside of the comp or inside the footage layer is a group called the RotoBrush mat, and under there's a couple of things called feather and reduce chatter, and both of those settings actually are areas that you guys can play with. Now, one thing I didn't go into detail on, and I mean we can fool with it tonight if you guys want, is the fact that every time you do a RotoBrush stroke on footage, in that effect, the thing that you run, the thing that happens is there's actually a lot of settings that are available to you for each individual stroke. You actually have a hardness number, you have a roundness number, you have an opacity for that stroke, you have a start and end percentage. I mean, it is, and of course, all of them are keyframeable. So you can absolutely, if you needed to alter it or change the value of it over time, you absolutely can. And those would be the additional kinds of settings that provide access to really dialing in exactly the way you want your mat to look once you've applied all of these strokes, these brush strokes. So, but the basic ones are under RotoBrush mat, and they include a feather, which acts like a mask feathering, where it blurs the edge of the mat, and reduce chatter, which is really meant to kind of get rid of very small, noisy, jagged edges and kind of denoise that edge of the mat so that it's a little more uniform. Of course, there's downsides to that. If you have maybe you're doing a mat of somebody wearing a Batman mask and you want those nice pointy ears, reduced chatter would basically make those ears kind of rounded. and not pointy. So I mean, some of that, and same with the feather, is that, you know, anytime you deal with those sorts of changes where the fine details on the edges are important to you, feather and reduced chatter are designed not to help you in that respect. They're actually going to make it a little tougher. Can you accelerate a lot of roto work with Mocha? Well, my pat answer is it depends. Depends on the work and on the footage. So generally speaking, Mocha can provide you with superior hand-drawn mask results if you do it carefully enough, because the whole point of it is that it is tracking a, you know, in the classic rotoscope model of you're tracking, you know, the palm of the hand, or you're tracking the forearm, or you're tracking the upper arm, or the shoulder, or the torso. You can actually, Mocha does a decent job of tracking the movement of those shapes over time, and so those shapes can actually become masks that then are your rotoscope. So Mocha can do it. It is, again, though, the question of accelerating it, I mean, anytime you don't have to draw a mask by hand, you're doing something faster. So yeah, it would be accelerated. Is there any particular reason you'd use a blue screen over a green screen, or vice versa? So generally, the easy way through this is, if your subject's wearing bright green or bright blue, you'd want to have the other chroma background available to you. Now, that is to say that does anybody know why chroma green is more used these days in digital? No? Okay. So your usual CMOS sensors that you guys have in the cameras that you shoot with these days, and even to a certain degree CCDs before that, have are basically, they're grids. They're square. Pixels are square, but you have red, green, and blue. So you have 3 colors, but you have four pixels per these squares. The pixels are not arranged like a stack in CMOS sensors. They're actually arranged next to each other. So you have red, blue, green, and then there's a fourth. And so what camera manufacturers generally do is they use green for that 4th pixel. So you basically, for any particular camera, you have more color fidelity with green than you do with red or blue. And it's not like you have that much more, but any advantage helps. So that's part of the reason why. Is it used to be that blue was the chroma background, because with film, the way film processing was done, it was easier to knock out blue when you were processing film with chemicals. Now with digital and the fact that you have pixels that are, you have 4 pixels and 2 of them are green, you have a slight advantage using green as the backdrop color. So just keep that in mind when you look at this. Would it ever be more practical to use chroma key in Premiere Pro versus After Effects? If so, then when? So this is when chroma key in Premiere works, you're absolutely okay to use it. If you can, and this goes again with any of the effects in Premiere. If the effect in Premiere gets you the results you want and you don't have to move it to After Effects, well, okay, don't move it to After Effects. But generally speaking, the chroma key effect or the chroma key effect in Premiere, I haven't used that much. Every time I have used it, I've been disappointed. So it would require that your background is extremely uniformly lit, with no wrinkles or ripples or other stuff in there, and that your subject is far enough away from the backdrop so that spill is reduced as much as possible. So that's a tall order for most, do-it-yourself producers. So there are some dials that you can tweak on the chroma key effect in Premiere Pro, but honestly, I'll find that. So my pat answer stands. If you can make it work effectively and get the results you want from the built-in chroma key in Premiere, knock yourselves out. Use it. But I will, generally speaking, I've found that it's not very capable and marginal situations. Certainly not with the chroma key footage that I had of a person wearing a green shirt, a green blouse on a green background. And I thought there's no way I'll ever make this work. And I can make it work with Keylight. I can't make it work in Premiere. When is the best time to use color difference key? Oh my God. So when Keylight has failed you utterly is my answer, but it's not going to happen. So, but we can pretend that it did, and maybe I'll bring this up. Somebody can remind me of this. So so the different keying effects that are in Premiere or in After Effects are there's a lot of them, and they all can have usefulness. Generally speaking, though, and this is actually Adobe's advice too, and I look at it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me, is that if Keylight does the job, I wouldn't go any further than that. If you really, if for some reason you're like, well, I want to experiment with it, then you're free to. But it's the idea behind the color difference key is it's complicated, and it wasn't something I was planning on going into depth on. Yes.
I was actually running into this problem where Keylight didn't actually help me at all. I had to filter through a couple of keying effects, and I think it was color difference that I actually did, because I was using a animation that I printed out that I made last semester, and the background was black.
Okay.
So I imagine it's hard to key something that's already black to be transparent. So I used color difference, and that worked perfectly.
Yeah, and that's not a bad idea. The point, and we can go into a demonstration of it. I don't like the color difference, but I think the idea behind it is that it's meant to solve very specific problems. But mostly, I'm also kind of like, I think you could do an unmultiply with Keylight on, because what you're talking about is that if you shoot something against a black background, you want to knock that background out, you can do what's called a demultiply. Now, it's the same problem as basically a color key where your color is black, and then anything that turns, anytime you use a shade of gray as your key, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, it's just, you're rolling down the highway that leads to misery, because so many things have neutral gray in them, and if black is your key, anything that's neutral is going to be partially transparent. And so how do you roll back from that? So but the idea behind the color difference, well, damn it, we'll go into it in the demo part of this, because I think that the time it's going to take me to illustrate it well, I don't know. We'll see. But I also think that Keylight probably could have worked with what you had. Some of it has to do with, but I haven't tried to unmultiply black backgrounds using Keylight, so I could be wrong. Okay, we're almost done. So what are the differences between bitrate and encoding? This one's kind of a left field because it's not related to our talk last week, but what are differences between bitrate encoding, CBR and VBR? My default setting is VBR 1 pass. Is it a preferable setting among them? So how many of you guys know what this is? CBR, VBR? Okay, so CBR is, and we'll talk a little bit about this more. This is kind of a taste of our Vimeo and YouTube unit, but CBR is considered a constant bit rate. So every frame of video gets a certain, or you have a certain amount of bits per second, right? So you divide that by how many frames per second you have. Every frame gets that budget of bits to describe that video or describe that frame. And so it's a one value, and every frame gets it. Doesn't matter whether it needs it or not. Frames of perfect black pixels get the same amount as something that has wild or just noise that every pixel's randomly chosen. Each of those frames will get the same amount of data available to it as a budget to encode that. So your black frames are going to be very uniformly encoded, and your noise frames are going to be kind of blocky garbage because there's basically the encoder runs out of bits that it can encode because it has only so many it can use per frame. VBR is what they call variable bit rate, and that is where you set an average bit rate, which is your target, and then you have a maximum bit rate that you won't go above. So if you want to take it from the point of view of its variable bit rate is where you set it at a maximum, and then you also have a target that's under that. If you set the maximum and the target to the same thing, you're going to get the same exact result as this. Okay? No, that's not exactly true, because even so, variable bit rate will basically use fewer bits for lower quality or lower complexity frames, even if it's set to the same maximum and average or set to the same value. It's just that it then reserves those bits that it didn't use. It kind of floats them until it hits a frame of video that's very complicated and it's going to take a lot of bits to get it working, and then it will use some of that extra data budget that it had in order to encode that with the best quality that it can get through. The idea of a one pass versus two pass, we don't really go into too much of that. Generally speaking, if I'm using the Adobe Media Encoder, it's going to be VBR one pass is kind of the easy go-to choice for that. I wouldn't choose constant bit rate unless I knew that what I was sending that video over had a hard ceiling to it, meaning that I knew I couldn't go above that ceiling, and what was going to play it was a very simple piece of hardware. Those would be situations where I would consider going with constant bit rate, but generally speaking, nah. So anyway, and that's, like I said, that's kind of a taste of it. There is more to this than just bit rate. There's more to video encoding than just bit rate. So don't think that this was everything. There's plenty more to learn on that front. Is After Effects used a lot in indie film productions, and do you think we've seen a lot of After Effects in non-mainstream multimedia? So yes, After Effects is used a lot in indie film productions. You might not see hardcore visual effects work being done in it, but it's still being used for color work. I can play with color work in After Effects tonight if that's what you guys want to fool with. I mean, there's plenty of room to experiment here. And this next part's my opinion. Most businesses that go and pay for commercial advertising, if they have any visual effects work being done for them, it's almost always being done in After Effects, because and this is where you guys get to at least enjoy some advantage, because in the marketplace there's lots of people that know After Effects, and After Effects is relatively easy to come by. So when you go work for somebody that understands the need for visual effects and compositing, you actually have some kind of an introductory amount of skills that can hopefully help you can use as a basis for your own exploration. So don't feel like it sounds kind of a bit like a question that's geared toward, do I have a future if I focus my time on After Effects versus some other compositing platform? My advice there is you should absolutely learn as much as you can about After Effects that you can tolerate. If you go to work for a visual effects studio and they have some other compositor, you will be able to leverage at least, well, you'll be able to leverage all of the fundamentals that you've learned. You might have to rethink about how things are plumbed together, because if you're using a node-based compositor, that is not going to, there's a paradigm shift there that's going to be a bit of a learning curve. It's not impossible, it's just a learning curve. Now more so than learning After Effects earlier this semester when you knew almost nothing about it. So, don't despair. It's a good program, and it is still in demand for visual effects and motion graphics work. Okay, so I have a couple of slides that I wanted to go through, and then we can kind of fool with whatever else you guys want to kick around. So, and of course, here I am. Hey, it's not 2016, Randy. It's 2017. All right. So this week, let's talk briefly a little bit. I want this to kind of be a wrap up, because next week we start with my least favorite software of all time, and Mike Starkey knows this. Is we're going to talk about Encore for a couple weeks, and then we're going to have 1 week where we talk about YouTube and Vimeo and encoding and all that stuff, and then then that's it. We're done. So the good news this week for you is I don't have a new assignment this week. So this is largely a survey at this point. I don't have a specific assignment for you to turn in next week for this. If there is obviously 2 assignments you're supposed to turn in tonight. So with that said, what I want to talk to you briefly about is a couple of slides talking about just thinking about your project. When you talk about doing visual effects, it pays to do the homework and do the research on the project and how you envision it happening. And then we'll kind of go through a survey of a few different tools. I thought I had, but I don't have a suitable way to project from this computer onto the thing. So maybe what we'll do is that would be freaky. Is we could try to show my laptop, which still has relatively old versions of Element 3D and Trapcode Particular. The reasons why I like to at least show them to you is that these tools, even though they cost between them, they cost a fair bit of money, a few $100s or several $100s. They are really widely used in the industry. And even though the versions that I have are older, they still hold up. So even though I don't go out and buy every brand new version the minute it comes out, there's a lot that you can still do with the tools available to you. So, okay, let's talk about how to think about your project. So the 3 steps that I think about here is, and we don't really go into, but this plays as part of your pre-production cycle when you're basically planning your shoot for any particular project. You should have an idea of what visual effects you want to have in your film. You should have an idea because it's your film, it's your project, it's the thing that you want to create. So if you think, oh, how am I going to have these guys fly off into the air, or if I'm going to have them lift heavy objects, or if I'm going to have them have laser beam eyes, or if I'm going to have them running through a burning house. Or it's like you're not actually going to light a house on fire and put actors in it. You're going to come up with a way to do it without that. So that's where we come in with this step. Think about how to think about your project. So so literally, when you talk about visualization, you should honestly create a storyboard. How many of you guys have storyboarded a project? Is that part of the curriculum you learn here, or is that something you wanted to do on your own? Something you got here, right? Okay. Now, the reason why you want that is to be able to understand what the audience sees and be able to describe it in a way that you can use for setting up your shots, but it can also be useful for setting up a visual effects and understanding how it might look to the viewer. So draw it, and you absolutely should draw it out, even if it's crappy stick figures. This is a really terrible set of storyboards I did for a music video from about 5 years ago, and it's from a local band. They wanted to do a machine that basically manufactures puppies, and so part of it was that they pour in this jar of something. It's called instant puppies. They pour it in, and then out, pours all of these little puppy dogs. And then the song's about excess, and so they basically want more puppies and more puppies. And then what happens is ultimately it goes terribly wrong, and then baby goats start to come out of this thing and chew everything up. So that's the concept. I mean, it's not particularly challenging. There's more elements to the story than that, but the sequence that we were looking at here was how to make something that, and it didn't look convincing. It looked like a cardboard mock-up of a machine, because that's what the aesthetic they were looking for. But the point here is not that I needed to do some sexy visual effects with that music video, but rather that I planned it out shot for shot in crappy stick figures. So I mean, you don't see them here, but I'm looking on the screen and I'm like, there's little lumps here that look like puppies, and I'm like, they're just kind of ovals with sticks for legs and tails. So visualize it. Next thing is you want to think about how to shoot the elements or capture the elements that go into the project. So you want to consider how they will overlap or blend, and how you might compose them together to get the shot that you're looking for. And absolutely, in this case, experimentation is going to set you free. So you will go and find and create some of these elements. So in this case, what you're looking at here is this was what do you call this one? I actually have this video on here, and I can play it for you, but it is it was kind of a demo reel for this company who to this date has not actually released their product. Go figure. But it was it was actually worked through a treatment to figure out that they wanted a shot of the Earth and the Moon, and you're in outer space, and then suddenly the logo, the company logo, flies up and you fly into it, and then it goes through this sequence of look at all these cool products. And the products were just static 3D renders of different demos. They weren't actually real products that you could hold in your hand. Later videos that they did actually had product that you could hold in your hand, but at this time they didn't. So they, all I had was this concept of I need a world map, I need a globe, I need part of it to look like it's at night. I need something that looks like outer space. So I got a shot of the Milky Way galaxy. Here's the company logo, and here's a set of still images. And so the next thing that you come up with is that you start assembling that. So now you'll see up here that here's the here's that Milky Way galaxy shot. And oh, and by the way, it's got lens flares and all sorts of other garbage. And then there's a globe that I created, and there's a little moon, and then there's actually the sun shining on it, and the transition from night to day for these different. And if you don't recognize it, this is Florida, and this is like the East Coast and New York and all that other stuff. So, and then you fly through the logo. The logo's right here, and then you have these different demos. So you go from this, where it's conceptualized, where you just have the raw materials, and then you have to kind of come up with how to make it look like the final thing. And so that's what this ends up being. So yeah, have a look. Or not. Don't have a look. Here we go.
The future is something everyone dreams about. New advances.
Oh, hang on. I got to do this where you guys can actually see it. Hang on. This is kind of ridiculous. All right. Let me turn off the lights. Because, yeah, looking at a screen that's washed out, not helpful.
The future is something everyone dreams about. New advances that will bring our world to life. Some technologies will seem magical, impossible even. Until now. Feel the future. Tactus. A new dimension of touch.
All right. I know. It's the best video you've ever seen, right? Of course it is. So the thing about that video is I did that almost entirely using Element 3D. Okay. So that was a demo of that particular software, with the exception of you go through this video and it is interesting. I'm gonna mute this now so that it's not. So when you do come through here and you see that it starts with the video starts with some relatively interesting demos where it goes from you're looking at buttons showing up on these the camera screens. It goes from a flat look to a textured look, pardon me. And these were literally still images. So I just had to do a crossfade between a still image without raised keys and then one with, and then add a little loopy-doopy sound design chirp that basically cues the viewer that something's happening and that they see, oh, look, the buttons come up. It doesn't actually make that sound when you do that. So, but all of those components, all those pieces, including the sound design, were stuff that we planned out before we produced this video. So, all right. So it's, the idea of taking something from, the point of view, the plan, breaking it down and then building it back up. That's really the key piece that I wanted to show you guys here. So the next thing that I wanted to kind of kick around is that, there are plenty of relatively mediocre YouTube tutorials on After Effects. How many guys have watched a really bad one? Yeah, almost ever. Okay, good. because they are particularly terrible when you're searching on YouTube for a tutorial and you can't find one. So I'll show you. There's a few good ones here to play with. If you're interested in doing which is still kind of in vogue right now, is doing flat two-dimensional motion graphics. This guy here, Mount MoGraph, he's actually got a really solid website with lots of, in fact, he's now branched into making his own tools. So he's actually following the same model that others have done before him. Okay, so he actually has shown enough aptitude in terms of how to do tutorials and how to make them useful and entertaining and all of that. And then he's now basically created his own set of plugins that help him do these two-dimensional motion graphics work, and now he sells it. So that model has been repeated a few times. So have a look at these if you guys want. It's I'm not going to click on it now, but this was actually one that I think somebody a year and a half ago basically mentioned as a really good source of 2D After Effects motion graphics tutorials. And I watched them and I agreed. They were really well put together, clear, easy to follow, and none of them take for too long to do. And they kind of actually, each of these will tell you what he uses. So this one's After Effects plus Mocha. See, this is a screen replacement, right? Where they just take a green background and they're going to replace it with something more interesting. There's AE would be After Effects, C4D is Cinema 4D. Again, some of these might be, okay, so this one says After Effects and C4D Lite, which would be something that you could probably pull off in the vanilla version of After Effects that you get installed, because there is a light version of Cinema 4D available to you when you install After Effects. So have a look through these. Again, there's plenty of them. Okay, and they start simple. They're really. He started with. He has a section on 2D puppets, and then he kind of branches out from there. So he starts doing more interesting, 2D work. He starts to branch into 3D work. It wasn't until a little more recently that he basically started showing what tools he uses for each one of these. But I've looked through several of them. I haven't looked through all of them, but I've looked through several of them. They're very, very cool. As far as the tool that he has, I'm not here to shill anybody's stuff, but his tool set is pretty decent. I mean, it's not hugely expensive either, and that's where I start to, like I said, I'm not trying to overly commercialize the class. But understand that in your work, you're either going to do this, you're going to do it for free, and you're only going to get so far, or you're going to get paid for your work, and you're going to be able to start using some of these tools. I don't specialize in 2D motion graphics. That's not my thing. I was doing more 3D stuff with that is not physics related. So I'm not using Cinema 4D. I'm generally using stuff like Element 3D to do 3D composites. So, but I would give this a try, if nothing else, just to see what the tools are. So there's that. Now, okay, so the next thing on the list is Red Giant. How many of you guys have heard of Red Giant? Yeah. So the tool that's mostly on there is Trapcode, the Trapcode suite. Also, until Premiere had brought out the what am I thinking? What's it called? It's a color correction, Lumetri. So before Premiere and Adobe had really kind of integrated the Lumetri color control into Premiere, Red Giant had a color suite with a tool called Colorista. And that thing, it's still good. Don't get me wrong. It's still a really good tool. And sometimes if I will use it to solve very specific problems, usually having to do with secondary color correction, where you want to select a certain region of a frame to do color work. Because I've used it so much, it goes quickly for me to use it that way. But what they're mostly known is for trap code, and in particular is the particle engine that still is widely used. It is very, very feature rich. And this thing is just like, it's absurdly useful. And it has its own rabbit hole in and of itself, separate from the After Effects rabbit hole. So your mileage will obviously vary. So the downside, of course, is that it is not cheap. So they do have a student version of this. You are, and sometimes, in fact, usually this time of year, they're doing a special for NAB. I don't know that they're doing one this year. Let me check. Actually, that's a good question. NAB 2017 Red Giant. Since NAB just wrapped up, yep, April 2017. Let's see. So is there any, it's looking like they've got pretty decent. I mean, it's 40% off of their regular price. Now, students generally, Red Giant does a good job for students as well. So if you are a registered student, they will generally run they'll give you like half off of this stuff. So it's like, you be patient and you can have these. But there is there's literally no end in how to work with particular. But in addition to that, they also Red Giant's another one of these guys. Stu Manchevitz was originally did tutorials. That's all he did, was tutorials online about After Effects. And then he started working, and then they put together this trap code suite. He started building tools, and then tools that he was using, and so that's what built his business on that. So, okay. Last of these that are like the super expensive, is Video Copilot. And even this one's out of date now. I think Video Copilot's moved on to. So videocopilot.net. How many of you guys have watched a demo or a tutorial on Video Copilot? The good news is that Andrew Kramer is very entertaining, if nothing else. So if you guys want to learn, if you want to learn how to do a video tutorial on After Effects, you should watch how this guy does it. But he's got definitely a very specific delivery, how he does his thing. But he does, yeah. So actually, their version of Element 3D is the same as it is in the slide. What I was trying to get to was I thought they had released a newer version of it, but this is still this is a year ago. I mean, I put this slide up here a year ago, and they're still selling it for that. So it is, generally speaking, not a particularly. It's not too expensive. Again, of course, everything's relative. I think, yeah, their basic price for Element is like $200. Again, they do offer some discounts for that. It has utility though in ways that, because if you're not willing to use the ray trace render in After Effects, it provides you with most of the goodness of the ray trace render without all the headaches.
So it's like sort of like a 3D modeling Element 3D, or does it just have this capability?
It just has capability of compositing 3D models. It doesn't actually, you can't create 3D models in Element. You can import them. So OBJ files and other stuff like that you can create in other tools. What you can do though is you can take flat 2D elements, 2D layers, and you can extrude them. And then you can do all kinds of edge treatments and different bevels and other stuff like that, so that you can trick it out, but it is still going to be based on a 2D layer. So that's what this was. Is I just had this flat 2D logo, and I turned it using Element. I turned it into this where it had, there was at least 3 different layers on here, because the gray was one texture, the orange was another texture, and the white thumbnail was a third texture. And I had to arrange them separately inside of Element, and then basically render them like this to get something that looked like the logo in 3D. So when we get to, we're almost to where it's a good time to take a break, and I can try to see if I can get this running on there. It will totally hose our YouTube live feed. So Lori's watching on the live feed, and she's probably going to start crying if I do that. So we'll see. So anyway, let's get back to this, and we'll wrap this up. We'll take a break. So Element 3D, again, this is what the UI ends up looking like, and if I can possibly make this work, I will. The idea behind it is that you have this capability here to create, and you have some basic shapes that they provide you. You can also buy object packs, for all kinds of different shapes, and usually they come with textures as well. They do have a set of shaders that are built in. You can actually purchase additional ones to texture these things, but they're not actually textured inside of After Effects. They do have ways to have the models interact with the lights that are in After Effects. So if you set a light and you place an object and you render an object in Element 3D, you can have that object respond to the light that's in After Effects. And that's where it starts to be kind of cool, is that Element knows about the 3D universe, the 3D coordinate model of After Effects. So that when you move a camera, it knows, oh, the camera's now looking over here, so I should render myself in some other location so that it looks like it's in the space. It looks like it's behaving consistent with the rest of the 3D coordinate space. So Element 3D. Well, like I said, if I can figure out, I might be able to work something tonight. I'll experiment with that during a break, and we'll see what we can do. Video Copilot tutorials. Again, this is another situation. Andrew Kramer started doing his stuff where he was just doing tutorials. That's all he did. And then he would create one thing, and then he created some element pieces or some other pieces. He started selling them, and then he built from there. So if any of you guys feel industrious, it's cool. All right, the last thing that I want to show you guys is this site. It's for resources. This is actually a really useful one, aescripts.com. So let's go take a look at aescripts.com because when you take a look at it, it's actually, all right, I'm going to hide that. That's cool. So when you take a look at it, it actually has a pretty decent set. Now the set keeps growing, which is the good news, is that now they're actually selling Mocha and Element as part of the AE Scripts. Now that wasn't the case last year, so this is all news. But they do have lots and lots and lots of different capabilities. So they do actually have basically plugins or scripts for all of these different applications, including After Effects, Premiere, Cinema 4D, even Photoshop, Illustrator. So they do actually have some capabilities there. So, and they're all kind of subdivided into different categories, including 3D or animation or audio or automating, different design tools, and so on. So if you guys wanted to delve into this, they do have the ability to do So the one that I always played with before was the fact that when you're dealing in After Effects, there's really no sense of gravity or physics, right? There's no ability to have things behave like they're in the real world and subject to the rules of nature. So there are tools that allow you to basically create, and they're usually all based on they're usually scripts or plugins based on the programming language that's built into After Effects. And so the one that I've looked at the most is one called Newton, which basically is like a really solid physics engine for 2D. So it's not a 3D physics engine. If you want to do 3D physics, you should use Cinema 4D because it has that capability. If you want to do 2D animation with physics, there's no easy solution for you. You can roll your own expressions, or you can pay somebody else who's already done the work. So your time, your money, you have the choice. Okay, so there's, and the selection's always changing. So another way to let me see if there's actually some tools in here for rotoscoping. So let's see if there's anything in here for rotoscoping. That's good. Oh, look, Mocha. So, and again, this is $556 for Mocha, which is, again, a very decent, it's what people use to automate rotoscoping if they want it to be like classic roto. There are some other ones less known. I've not tried them, so what you'll find in some circumstances are plugins that actually you get to, and they don't show me here. There was a place where you could choose, or there's a category of plugins where you can choose your own price. So and that, I don't know if that's still as popular as it was. So let's go to some of the automation stuff. So you'll see that, let's see if there's some, some of these are not, and they're very specific tools, but some of them are not, hideously expensive. So, but they're designed for to solve very specific problems. Just take down the URL. This one's one of these where you can spend plenty of time researching, finding the tools that do just what it is. In some circumstances, they'll let you try out the plugin before you have to spend the money, so that you can at least test it and make sure that it's going to do what you need it to do. Sometimes not. So let me see if there is a category. There used to be a category in here that lets you you could find the tools that didn't cost anything, because there are still some scripts in here that can work with some pretty cool things that are either free or cheap.
I found one like a standalone application where it says name your price.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about.
It's
is
like
that
$9.99 or name your price.
Right, and so in some cases you can, and you can't really tell here whether it's one of these, but so one of the camera. So I think I had mentioned this before about how to animate cameras in 3D. So there's one plugin that I've played with in the past. It's actually pretty amazing. It's called Multi. And it's this guy right here, this Multi-Rig, which is, it's $50, but damn, the thing is just, you set it and you tell it, you just say, I want it to move to this point and then orbit, and orbit around a fixed point, and then it does it. It's just like, it's like telling your DP what you want, and then it executes. And I was substantially surprised and delighted by this one. So again, this one comes with lots of demos and discussions of how to use it. It does have some interesting, I think this one's a relatively short reel, So this one's the rig in action, so you can see some of the things that it does automatically. And so these are commercials. These are, like I said, these are all people that have used After Effects to show off their work. And this particular one is where all of these have been used for commercial work, and obviously for a language that we don't understand. So some of these are in Polish, I think, if I'm not mistaken. All right. So you kind of get the idea. You can sit there and browse this all day long. It's again, it's not a. It is a very an interesting set of tools that are available to you. Again, you know, they're always changing and always evolving. So I haven't been here in months, so I'm sure that I'm going to be like, oh look, something's new. And there's plenty of those opportunities abounding. So, all right, it's a few minutes after 8. What I want to do is I want to take a break. It might be a little bit longer because what I want to try and do is set up this computer. And what I may do is we might actually screw with the Google Hangout and add this as another screen, but we can view it on this screen. We'll see. So anyhow, give me a few minutes. 8:05. Why don't we check in about 8:20, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Okay. So stick around. that's poopy. All right. Well, it's going to be suggestive. Let's put it that way. Oh, hang on, I should mute this. There we go. Okay. Make sure I'm, yep, okay, good. Everything's 5 by 5. This ought to be interesting though. Cool. Okay. We can get started. Good news is I got trap code particular. The bad news is I don't have element. I thought I had element on this computer. Can't demo it. The other thing we'll do is I'll just go through particular just briefly, and then we can go back and we can talk about anything else you guys want to cover tonight. Because, like I said, this is somewhat of a freebie in terms of the content for this week. I don't generally test you on what's in here, so that means that you guys are all like, well, now I'm out. No, that's fine. But the point of this is to we've spent so much time just dealing with kind of the fundamentals and the specific, do this, access these tools this way. The big part of this that we don't spend much time in, and I've mentioned it before, is we don't spend much time doing actual effects because there's so damn many of them.
So I was wondering if we could go into like using some of the noise effects and whatever, because that seems like that has like the most versatility, especially for fire.
Right. Yeah. And fractal noise is the thing you're thinking of, and it is absolutely one of the most versatile effects that you can put onto and it is as much variety as you can possibly imagine. Okay, so here's what I'm hoping I can make this work. And it might just work. We'll see. Is that I'm going to drive this laptop who's broadcasting to the same Google Hangout. So I'm actually driving this laptop, and you see the mouse moving on the screen. But this one is projecting up there. Yeah, whatever. Okay. In order that the YouTube live gods are appeased, I'm doing it this way so that at least we can show you guys a little taste of what a very expensive plugin is capable of doing. And I'm going to fumble through this. I can tell you right now, because it has been how many years since I've fooled around with particular? It's probably been a couple of years since I've really played with it in any meaningful way, mostly because most of the work that I have been doing is in Element, and unfortunately, I don't do it on this laptop, so I didn't have it installed on this laptop, and I felt like, oh, that's awesome. And there's a lovely message from my wife saying, hey, I hope everything's going great. I'm like, it's going great, honey. Leave me alone. All right. So when you start off working with these effects, what you end up working in is you'll start with an empty project space. So you'll have a basic composition set up. So if you look in the project, you have a comp. And in this case, I'm going to even delete that and this, so that when you're starting off, you'll start a new project. You have this one composition in it, and if you even want to go back to just starting from scratch, you can create a new composition. We can just call this one particular demo, right? And 1080p, 398, which is what my defaults are set to, and I have it set to a 5-second duration. And so click OK, and now we've got a comp here with nothing in it. So it's completely empty. Into that, for most of these effects that you find third-party plugins for, they generally want to be applied to a solid layer. So you'll just create a new layer, and you'll create a solid. And then you would call this, generally speaking, the convention, if you want to call it a convention, is you would put the effect name on it. So in this case, you might just say particular one, okay? So that you have one particular, but it's right now it's just a gray solid. Now, when you want to apply these effects, you've got two ways to do it. You can either go brute force through the effect menu, find your way down to any of the Red Giant. You'll see that I've got the Red Giant suite here. Here's Colorista, Denoiser. But then there's also this one called Trap Code, which has a bunch of ones in it. The one that we're going to play with tonight is Particular. So, and when you pay into this Trap Code suite of tools, it comes with a lot of these different tools, and they all have different aspects to them, all have different kind of approaches to what these particular effects do. In this case, let's just put up the particle engine that everybody talks about, okay? So it doesn't look like much right now, but now what's important to note is that you started with a gray solid, okay? But once you apply this, your background, it takes over that layer entirely, and basically applies a different view on top of that solid. So the solid really is just a placeholder on which to apply particular. Something I hadn't thought of, but it's worth at least looking at is what if this was an adjustment layer? Well, really? What the hell? Why not? So we'll type in particular. And understand there are some built-in particle capabilities in After Effects. CC Particle World is one of them. Not terribly feature-rich, but is a good start if you wanted to at least experiment with some of the capabilities. Particular kind of takes it to a totally different level. This looks like it might work. No, it doesn't work. Okay, now that was a fail. Okay, so yeah, it has to be on a solid. So understand that it's on a solid. Okay, so anyway, we've got particular on a solid, so don't disregard that last one. So the way you know it's working is that if you scroll the timeline, you'll see that as you move across the timeline, you start to see some action happening here. So there's actually particles being emitted. So the way they talk about particles in this tool is that they come into being from an emitter. So there's a point somewhere in here. Sometimes it's not just a point. Sometimes it's a space that these particles are born. They do something for a while and then they die. Okay, so these are all kind of parts of that. There's a lifespan for a particle. So when you first look at them, you have a notion of an emitter, which is up here in this first group. So the very first one is a register button. I don't know why I'm not registered, but I have the passcode if I had to. So no, hey, I don't pirate this stuff. So anyway, you have some values that you can add. You have particles per second, which basically increases the number of particles that show up over time. The default is 100. You have an emitter type where, again, you have different ones. The default is a point. It could be a box or a sphere. If you do a sphere, then your sphere has basically a shape to it, a size, and some kind of notion of space that it takes up. You have there's emitter grids and so on. So there are ways that these particles come into being. You have there's all kinds of capabilities in terms of rotation and other stuff, but I want to move on from the emitter to talk about each individual particle. So, particles come from an emitter, and that's this little point in space. But what makes it interesting is that particles, you'll see, have a lifespan. So there's one here this one by default says 3 seconds. So let me see if I can make it, if they last longer. So now this is a 5-second comp, so it's not like you're going to see a lot, but you'll see that as you scroll through this, look at some of these particles on the edge. As they reach the edge, they kind of wink out, and that's because they've reached their 3-second lifespan. Okay. Now the other thing you'll get is that particles kind of have a velocity, right? They're basically moving away from this emitter in some form or fashion. So you've got there's particle types. So let's talk about the different particle types. There's the default one is a sphere. You think about how big the sphere is. If you actually grow the size, you can kind of start to see the shape of it. Okay, so you actually have these are spheres, and then you also have the idea of a glow sphere. A cloudlet, which is just a different shape. It's not a sphere. It's something a little more kind of goofy. You have polygons. Actually, that's a textured polygon. Let me see if there's a. I can't. I don't want to have to go spend a ton of time on this. And see, you got to define. If you start to move into these, you start to move into where you define where these different particles get their look from. So you can, but even just from the default angles, you actually have considerable amount of control over how they look, and they can give you quickly can form a pretty an interesting kind of look that is not what you know. It doesn't automatically kind of look like just dots on the screen. You're like, these things seem to have a little more thickness to them. You actually have the ability in all of these cases to introduce a randomization of the values. So you'll see that as you move the slider, some of these particles end up with a different size over time. You have the ability to vary the size over the life of the particle. So you can have particles that start small down here and then kind of grow, and then maybe they shrink again before they die all the way off. Now, what this is actually basically a graph of that you can just draw on, and that's all I did was I just clicked and drew how I want the particles to behave over time, such that now when you see them, they start small and then they kind of grow big, and then as they reach the end of their life, they fade out. So this one, like, look at this one right here, is a little fat, and then in a couple of frames, let me move forward. Oops, sorry. This is me not having a page down button. So as we move to the end, you'll see that the particles tend to kind of quickly drop off in size before they wink out. So that's just varying the size. There are some presets here that you can use that basically will change the default slope. It doesn't that doesn't change how it behaves. But these, you'll see these controls a lot in particular. So you can actually swap, you can flip it so that the graph changes it in the opposite direction over time. You have the same thing, opacity over life. You have other ones like this color. The color randomness is over this, but there is also a color over life, which doesn't look exactly like this, but does show a the ability to change color from one set point to another as it ages. So if you wanted to set the color over the life, you can see now that it follows this preset or any of these presets here. So you can have colors that start with a deep yellow at the beginning, move to red and then pink and then purple as before they die off. So at the beginning, you'll see a little more reddish, and anything closer to the center is going to be red because of the way that the physics are set up right now. Okay, moving on from the particles. Now, again, this is like the cheap approach to this, but you have the ability to do shading, where the shading is actually dealt with by the lights that are in your composition. Now, since there are no lights in my composition, you don't see anything. But if I add an ambient light, you'll see. So if I just add an ambient light, you should see things come back. Okay, so by adding an ambient light to the comp, now the shading is actually, so the particles are actually responding to the lights that are in the composition. So if you had a spotlight, you had colored spotlights, you had spotlights in different places pointing at different things, it's behaving according to that. So it does respond to that. That's kind of a nice, so the ability for it to composite with existing 3D layers that you might have is a benefit here. Now you have, there's there's an air and a bounce model, but the idea is that you do have a notion of gravity. Currently there's no gravity, but if you add gravity, you start to see immediately that instead of it, so now they basically fall down. You do have a notion of negative gravity though, so you can have things fall up instead of down. It's just the slider does go from 0 to 1,000, so it's not like. But don't take for granted that 0 is the least. You can always use negative values with some of these. So you do have the idea of air. So there's basically you can actually assign a motion path. So if you created a path in a shape layer, you could point that motion path at this, and then basically the wind will behave in that way. It'll either be, you can create a turbulent sort of look to it. You do actually have a pretty wide range of choices here as well. So you can let's see. Well, we can add air resistance. We can add a spin to them so that over time they're kind of churning. They don't just start and stop at one point. They actually end up falling into. Maybe we just dial down the air resistance a little bit more so that it's 0.2. It's probably good. Okay, so that now when you're looking at this and they come off, you'll see that they're swirling a bit. So there's a little bit of air flow. So this is how you might come up with motes of dust, is some ideas here. So you have the idea of spin amplitude, spin frequency, which is going to be a little more, a little more turbulent, a little more kind of active. Maybe these are fireflies now, it's like, or gnats or whatever. I mean, just think in terms of all of the things in the world that you can kind of treat this way, and it starts to make a lot of sense. It starts to be very.
So would you tell it what it is? Like, could you say there's like, oh, give it one fly and it will create another? How is it?
No. They're all still particles. I mean, they're still basically, these are still individual kind of elements that are being spun out of this point. Okay, there are ways to set this, but I mean, like I said, it's 8:30. It's how long do you guys want to be here for this one thing? I'm telling you guys, I particular is a very deep subject. It is not. It is its own set of rabbit holes that kind of move beyond what you're accustomed to. So if you wanted to look at the, so say for instance we wanted to have we could put an expression on these. So let's start to play with some of this stuff too. So we've got, let's go back here. We'll do an Alt, click on that, and then we're going to type time times 50. On the Y rotation, we'll do another expression. We'll do time times 75. And then on the Z rotation, maybe we'll make it a little slower. We'll do time times 25. Now, what do we just do is you've now created this effect where, and maybe because there's so much swirling going on, it's not quite as visible. So maybe we'll turn off the error resistance and all of these values so that we're not seeing them. We're seeing them more or less spinning in space over time. And no, it's still not working. All right, fine. So what we can do is we can actually start with velocity, mission extras, pre-run. So if you wanted to start a composition off with a preset number of particles, you can actually come and do that so that at the beginning of your comp, you're preloaded with stuff. We might say that because we're preloaded, we don't want any more particles per second, or actually we go from 100 particles per second and then keyframe it, move forward one frame, and go to 0. Okay, so, well, actually, no, that's the end. All right, never mind. Good job, Randy. Good job. All right. So you start with particles per second here, and as they go over time, no, they didn't. Okay, so we didn't even get there. Cool. Here we go. So go forward a couple frames. We'll keyframe this, and we'll set it to 0. So now what it does is that it starts with all of these particles, which are still moving, but they're just not, there's no new ones being created. So that after 3 seconds, basically they're all gone. So if you turn down the velocity, they'll just stay in place. They'll all be basically emitted from there. Actually, let's put a little bit on there so that there's some amount of. All right, and then velocity for motion. Yeah, give it a little more oomph. So as this continues, now what I wanted to do was start to play with the notion of. Oh God, yeah. See, this is where it starts to get kind of nutty. So there's let me move on because, like I said, I want to get through at least a few more of these before you kind of get a sense of what this whole thing is. So each of these particles actually can become an emitter itself. So now imagine that you have this thing that basically this point that emits these particles. You also can now have each of those particles emitting more particles. It's like, yeah, it's like, was it, yo dog, we thought you liked particles, so we got particles with your particles, and that's what this is. So it basically will, and the default is to have it kind of be these tracers. You can actually do you can increase the number of particles per second so that it actually creates these little streamers. They become the life themselves actually can be modified so that they behave the same way. They actually, the way they behave is they can be the same as the main particle, or they can be a totally separate one. So this is an opportunity also to experiment with creating these particles can start to have thickness, or they can start to be strings. They can start to do all kinds of wild things. Yes.
Jay,
can you have like multiple emitters that aren't the particles that you generate within the scene? So you can have like that one emitter and then like two other emitters.
You can do multiple versions of this. You can basically set it once, then duplicate it and move that off to another place to have a separate emitter. That's one way to do it. Or you can actually, depending on how you want it, you could have a box emitter where the let me see if I can pull up the emitter size now shows up as a thickness. Okay, so it has, you have an emitter size here, which is maybe 300, and then 300, and then 300. And now your particles are actually all kind of coming out of a volume of space. So they're not from a single point. And so, you know, and these are just Mickey Mouse examples, but this starts to, you know, you start to go, whoa. And this is, again, really fertile ground for experimentation. You know, guaranteed that not everything has been figured out in particular, not even in this version, yeah.
So it's not like a separate plugin that should come with After Effects?
I wish it came with After Effects. I really do, man. And that's why I'm showing it to you on this one. If I had it, if it was available on the default install, we'd all be playing with it. But I have, yeah, I know. So I'm going to wrap this up, and then we're going to move on to doing a couple more effects that you do have access to, so that you guys don't completely go, Randy, just show me things I can't play with. But I want to show you this because this is widely used. Even now, Particular is still very widely used in the industry for all kinds of stuff. For 2D, 3D, sort of, I mean, it's you name it. These guys have a particularly interesting tool. You can simulate fire. Generally speaking, it'd be like the little crackly sparks and the wisp, the little motes of sparks that come off of a fire. Particular would do that, but you can also kind of do that in particle world. So don't despair too much. But it's man, I'm telling you, this is the tool that a lot of folks rely on for their bread and butter. All right. So now that I've spoiled you all rotten, let me come back up here. I'm going to switch back to me. Hello, me. Go back to sharing my whole screen, and no, I don't want to do that. All right, so there we go. Okay, so I can put that down there. So the sickening lurch of how it works here. So in the meantime, what we can do is we can play with some of the things that we started talking about here, and I wanted to make sure that we got to tonight before we say goodbye to After Effects entirely. So let me regroup here so that I've got this where I need it to be. I'm going to dump this guy out. Nope, not going to do that. I'm just going to close you down. All right, cool. And hopefully I didn't completely trash YouTube. We'll see. How we doing, YouTube? We happy? It seems like we're reasonably happy. Okay. So, yep, I'm seeing what I'm seeing. Good. Okay, so it's still kicking ideas around with Particular on the stream, so that ought to be great. Okay, so now what I want to look at is we'll create a new project. Let's talk about fractal noise, okay? So fractal noise, if you guys want, you can do this one. This one's one you absolutely can fool with, and you're probably better off playing with it than just watching me. So if you don't already have this open, go ahead and open After Effects and load up a 1080p comp. I would probably make it 10 seconds tops. Don't freak out too much. And then click OK. Again, put a a solid on here. So just choose a dark gray solid. And then from effects, if you type in fractal, you'll see that you've got two effects. One is fractal, which is not a particularly helpful thing. If you're into fractals, it's kind of cool and fun. You can actually do some things with it where you modify the values over time. Okay, so you can actually kind of zoom in, and you're like, whoa, hey, bro, that's not weird at all. Where you can, and then show this, and you can actually vary the color over time and do all kinds of fun things where, it changes color and it's trippy and it's fun. Fractals are not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about fractal noise. Now, when you look at fractal noise, you think this is not particularly remarkable, Randy. Why do I care about this? Well, part of it is the notion of depicting natural phenomenon in a computer is not something that computers are terribly well suited for. Now, when you talk about fractal noise, this is kind of an exception. Now, I'm not going to go into the mathematics behind it, mostly because even I don't really fully understand the mathematics behind fractal noise, but I don't have to know that in order to exploit it. So first and foremost, you actually have a fair number. It doesn't look like you have a lot of controls here, but you actually have more than you think. So first and foremost, you actually have several different types of fractal noise. Basic is the most boring one of all of them. If you really want ones that look interesting, you can actually do turbulent. Any of the turbulent ones are kind of wild. They kind of look a bit like computer circuits almost. Okay. You have the notion of dynamic, which if you look at it at first, you think it's nothing remarkable. But if you kind of look closer on this, let me see if there's an easy way to. So if we scale this up, you'll see that from the basic, where you get kind of it just looks kind of like haze that goes from one gray tone to another. If you move to dynamic, you'll see that what you start to get is a little bit of a pinch and bulge sort of action, which is really kind of reminiscent of clouds or boil, kind of like how many of you guys have ever done dry ice in water, where you get the kind of billowing sort of thing? That's the sort of dynamics that you're getting from this one. When you look at these, you'll see, and when you start from the default, you'll see that it looks pretty diffuse when it's zoomed out. You can scale in. It's a fractal. It'll bring in detail, but also understand that if you zoom in a lot, it will start to look kind of unsophisticated, and so you do actually have a setting for that, where you can and that is the complexity value. So to look at the we'll go through some of the other settings. Contrast and brightness are kind of what you expect. If you want really strong contrast between light and dark, you can roll on or roll off of that to make it very flat or very stark contrast. You can increase or decrease the brightness as needed. There's a setting here that basically shows what do you do if brightness and contrast go beyond 100% brightness. And the idea is that the default is to allow what they call HDR, high dynamic range results, meaning that you can have something brighter than white, but the idea that you can use that value in other ways, especially if you're doing blend modes or other things where having full brightness is not going to just be white. It's going to be something else. So let's talk about the idea of complexity. So I started showing you some of the transform group where you can do things like rotate, scale. You do have a notion of uniform scaling where you can rotate on or scale width or height independently. So if you clear this, you now have a width and height scale, whereas if you click it here, you just have one that works for both. You have an offset turbulence, which is, well, we'll get to that. And then you have, so that's the transform group, which is fun. You have this complexity value, and so the complexity goes from 1 to 10. Actually, I think it goes even lower. So if you roll off, you'll see that as you no, I guess 1 is about as low as it goes. So as you go to a really low complexity, the styling of the fractal is definitely affected, right? As you increase this value, you start to see detail come in, right? So once you when you're at a certain scale, once you hit between 5 and 6, you probably have hit all the detail that you can possibly perceive at this level. If you zoom in, though, you can keep getting more detail out of these by increasing the detail value. So even though you scale in and you're scaling and you're zooming in further and further, you can continue to increase this value and increase this value to keep getting more detail in your fractal. So now you can see that when you have this, if you set this to 6, this is just a blurry blob. Whereas if you set it to 15, you now have a lot of detail back in here. And that's the nature of fractals, okay? The idea of fractals is that you can delve as deeply as you can, and you'll never, as long as you mind these settings, you actually can take a journey into this thing and have it, continue to provide detail the further and further you go. And I don't think there's any bottom to that rabbit hole either. Just putting it out there. I don't know if there's a limit to this. 65535. Oh, 10,000. Okay, so 10,000 is your limit. Don't go above 10,000 because you can't get any further. But once you're there, you can still continue to roll on. It looks like 20 is our limit on the complexity. So there's the boundaries of your rabbit hole. Enjoy them. Okay, so let's.
What was that 65535?
I was just trying to put a big number in here to see where the end was. So the bottom of the rabbit hole, I was just putting a big number. It could have been 100,000, but as soon as you hit that, it will put the largest value that you can put in there. So in this case, 10,000 is the limit. And in this case, also, I thought that it could go beyond 20, but it can't. So 20 is that. So this is just zooming in on this, okay? That's all that was designed to show you. So when you do a 100% scale, this is what you get. Notice that at 20 complexity value of 20, there's no difference to this value right now. You can set it back to 6 and it still doesn't look any different. You can set it to 5 and you start to see some fine detail going away. Set it to 4 and now you can definitely tell that the quality is diminished. So complexity has to do with how deeply into this you're viewing. Okay. With subsettings, you actually do have a lot of control over these as well. So you have the notion of what detail the subcomponents of the fractal are providing. So you see that if they're stuck at their values or their normal values, they're kind of weak. But if you increase them, they add some texture on the darker or the low detail ends of things. You can actually scale it, so that's kind of a sickening sort of effect too. Okay, and then you have a notion of rotation, so you can rotate the subs. So you notice that there's two fields happening here. You've got the main fractals, which stays fixed, right? And then you have this subfield, which is its own thing. And it's not rotating linearly. If you look at the center, this actually rotates a little faster than the other parts. So there's multiple layers underneath this that all play into this. So these are all different settings. You have the ability to set the offset of the sub so that it's somewhere else, so that when you rotate it, it's evolving from a different point. And then finally, you have let's talk about evolution. Okay. So when you talk about fractals, generally you're not talking about it being a fixed static image. You want something to have some motion to it. And above and beyond things like rotation, which are all well and good, the thing that most people associate with fractal noise is evolution. So when you go to mess with evolution, you'll see that now over time, the values in the fractal change over time. Now, remember that these are all of these values are keyframeable. And so and what's commonly done with fractal noise is that you would put an expression on evolution and you'd link it to time. So you'd link it to the time, how many seconds you're into this. So let's say we're doing a 10 seconds. So we want this thing to rotate, to evolve, one full rotation every 5 seconds. So 5 times 360. It's like what is that? We'll do 70. So time times 70. No, times 700. There we go. Okay. So now when you see this, you'll see that as it plays, it moves pretty quickly. So maybe time times 70 is kind of crazy. So we'll back it off. We'll do times 350 or 250. There we go. And now as it plays, you'll see that there's a reasonable ripple effect going on where it's just gonna. Okay, so this is how you animate fractal noise in a flat context.
So what would you use that for example?
So, well, there's, oh my God, the number of uses for this are pretty dramatic. So if you wanted to, you could play with more settings in here, but what ends up happening is that you'll find, well, even if we just stick with that, what we can do is we can actually add some additional effects to this. So you can put in a curves and then basically create an extreme version of this, more than what you could possibly accomplish with the contrast and brightness that are built into the effect. And now you've got something that looks a little more like this. Or you can go back into fractal noise, you can invert it, and now you've got something that looks a little, and if you zoom in a little bit, you've got something that looks a little bit like water. Okay, like the water in a pool.
So can you change the colors too?
Of course. So if you wanted the colors to be different, what effect might you want to put on there? Anybody want to spit it out? Tint. Hey, I heard somebody. So add tint, and now you can actually basically map your colors to whatever you want. So if you want it to be like water, you can do that. Okay, so now your water. Okay, now if you wanted to slow down the evolution, change the tint to orange. You could slow down that evolution that we had set, right? And maybe make it times 50. And now it could plausibly be, it's probably not moving well enough to be like fire, but you can actually add some additional pieces to that to help with this. So the idea of the wispy, let me pull some of these things together where I can do this. Yeah, spline ends up giving you a little bit more of a, it's hard. It can be hard sometimes to get the look exactly where you want it. Some of the curves are probably playing against this as well on this one. So if you wanted, well, no, maybe not. Maybe it's exactly where we want it to be. So So you've got this notion of flames moving. They're kind of a little too ripply and not vertical enough. So what we can also do is add another effect, which is very famous in the visual effects place. It's called turbulent displace. And now, so after we've stacked all of these things together, we've got fractal noise, curves, tint, and turbulent displacement. You actually can do the ability to, actually this one also needs to be done through evolution so that it's set to time. So we'll do a time times 100 there. And now you start to see a little bit, I mean, and I think that this is kind of comical to look at. So it's, I don't like exactly where we're headed with it, but we'll keep trying. So the idea is that you can do a vertical displacement. So there's a little more. It's focusing on vertical distortion. So it's a little less. And it's also with fractal noise, you can actually do some amount of motion on this front, where you can do a. Here we go. So we can actually keyframe this value as well, so that that it's moving upward, so that it gives kind of the effect of heat going up. So you can come in here. We could do. Let's see. What could we make happen with this one? So we want this to be 962 times 100. Okay, and then now what you'll see, times negative times 100. Okay, so now, so what I've done is I've actually set that value so that it's not going to move side to side. It's just going to move vertically, and as it moves over time, you'll see that it's climbing upward. Okay, so now, and again, it's not I wouldn't call this a perfectly good, fire effect. There's too many spots where it kind of pauses, takes a break, but it's suggestive. I mean, again, I'm not. I don't claim to be the fractal noise fire expert, but you see how the experimentation and knowing just a little bit of the tools that you need to play with. Most of what I've shown you guys is some simple expressions that you use to kind of get these things in motion, so that you don't have to like keyframe values from beginning to end. You just set an expression, and then you can run that. You can just have it loop forever. And if you don't like how fast it's going, you can change the constant value here. Remember that time, this value in an expression, is actually the number of seconds. Okay, so it's like starts from 0.00. Once you're half a second in, it's 0.5, and so on. So if you don't want it to move, if you don't want things to change very quickly, you don't bother multiplying times anything. But if you leave that off, what ends up happening is that it moves so slowly. So now the evolution is not happening very fast at all. So even if we take a punt on the turbulent, the offset, you'll see that really it's the turbulent displace is what's making a bunch of noise. And even if we turn that off, you'll see that really the fractal's not going anywhere. Well, it is. It's just moving so slowly that you need to give it a little bit of a multiplier here. So that's why you can start with small numbers like 10. And then now, by the time you've moved 1 second, you'll see that the evolution is at plus 10%. And so if that is fast enough for you, then that will work. If it's not fast enough for you, you increase the multiplier until it is. So you can, and there's some kind of regular values that you'll plug in here, 100, 200, 150. Just, you play with the experiment with it. Don't limit yourself. And remember that we started with something very, very basic. Like this fractal noise was not a particularly challenging set of settings to get to. Some of it was dynamic because we want something dynamic. We didn't even touch on any of these. These are basically alternate treatments of the fractal noise. There's the different noise types. So we've only looked at linear, but there's block, which looks like blocks, and then there's a soft linear, which is going to be slightly better than the regular linear. And then there's this spline, which is a little more smeary in still. So if you're looking for something to be very distorted and bubbly, this is definitely something you can look at doing. So yeah, fractal noise. It's a hugely complicated effect just by itself. There are many tutorials that use it. But what you'll find in a lot of cases is they just have their standard settings, and which are fine if you part of the idea of, and this might be the last thing we talk about. Part of the idea of working in tools like After Effects is that invariably there's trade secrets, right? There's techniques that you kind of come up with, and you don't necessarily feel like, hey, I'm going to tell everybody how I did that. I find that generally speaking, the best folks in the industry don't need those sorts of trade secrets. They're constantly trying to improve their craft such that they can give away what they worked on before because they already done that. That's not news to them. What they're trying to basically find novel combinations of effects and elements that they can create on their own, and then to start to fool with this thing. But fractal noise is one of those that can be a staple. It's as much a staple as blend modes, compositing in general, pre-comps, rotoscopes. This effect by itself can be a really interesting place for you to experiment and play around. Okay, so I don't know that I got a lot more to say tonight. Any questions on this? Anything else that you guys want to see that since it's 10 after 9, or are you guys ready to bug out? I'm good either way. So if that's it, then that's cool. And if you got questions, come up and see me, or I'll see you all next week. We will start talking about Encore next week. My favorite software of all time. Yes.
I'm just wondering, for a mask, there's like in Photoshop, there's like sort of a gradient for opacity. Is there something similar to that in After Effects?
A gradient for opacity. Not sure I'm following that particular one, but
so pretty much like after in Photoshop, like you would have a mask,
right,
and then like black eyes, wiper field. So like you would just have a gradient for that. I'm wondering if there was something similar to that effect here.
Not positive that there is. One thing to because masks in this sense are not what you're talking about, and that is more like an alpha channel. So yes, you can fool with the alpha channel in any particular layer. Geez, how would I whip that together in a short time frame? Let me think about this. Good question, actually. That's actually a really good question. Right. Yes, you could. Okay, fair enough. What we can do is you do have the ability to drop that in. I'm trying to think about how to apply a ramp to a mask and have that affect the opacity. It's probably going to be something like a track mat. is what it's probably going to end up being. So you would create a new solid. You would put it underneath. You would apply ramp, a gradient ramp, which would get put on this. Let's turn that off. So you see that you have this gradient, right? It goes from white to black. You can set the type that it is, whether it's a radial, where the origin point is. Okay, so you can set the ramp as you like. The other part of this is you want to apply that to a mask, and so you could switch here, go to Illumimat, and then now you've applied a Illumimat of this gradient to, so this would be, gradient mat, okay, and then you have applied it to this. Now remember that this is a transparency thing, so it's like even though you've applied Illumimat here, it's really just on the as the comp. It's not actually changing the well, it is, but it's basically adding black to the because this is the ramp. So remember, it's the ramp is, if you look at the ramp as it stands. Well, let's turn the mat off. So this is what the ramp looks like. It's black at the top and white at the bottom. And when you apply it to this, you'll see that it's actually the areas that are white on the fractal are turned to black, whereas here they aren't. So that when you turn that off, that's the effect you get. It's not actually changing the opacity, but it's similar. Okay.
Yeah, but if you apply that over, like, if you want to apply that over something and then, like, animate the evolution, you would see that over the background.
Yep. Yeah. So it's always possible. It's just how you want to make it work. So that would be one way to do it. There are other ways to do it. Generally speaking, if you want another way that you could do this, which would be not as would be different, is that you could go in here with a mask like this. Oops, except I don't want to do it there. I want to do it like a mask like this, and then just make sure it's nice and big, and then add a ridiculous feather to the top, right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and now you've got that same sort of drop off, but this is transparency. Okay, so yeah, your mileage may vary. There's no set solution here that's the one size fits all. Just be aware of that it's the different methods of, and this is, again, we've shown you blend modes, we've shown you track mats. You possess the raw tools. It's just finding a novel way to mash them together becomes the thing. That's exactly the thing. Mashing them together in those novel ways, sometimes you'll run across something that looks like garbage, and then you tweak one thing and suddenly it looks awesome. And so don't ever that's why I was like, it's not looking the way I want, but I'm not going to quit. I just keep trying stuff. I keep experimenting. Actually I can animate this. So I'll set that so that it's lifting upwards so that the flames are moving up. You can give the impression of fire and flames without a whole lot of trouble. I mean, I whipped it out in less than half an hour, and that was a crappy example. So, you've got the ability to do all of these things. It's just, I can't show you every technique on how to do everything, because that would be, I would be working my whole job would be coming up with new ways to teach you how to show you these specific techniques. What you guys will hopefully come away with is realizing that you possess enough knowledge about the raw tools inside of this program that you can start to experiment yourselves. And you're going to come across techniques that maybe nobody else has ever tried. And part of it is you won't know because searching for it on YouTube is damn near impossible. Stumbling across it on YouTube is even less possible. And unless you know a bunch of motion graphics artists or visual effects artists, you won't know what they've tried. So, have an enterprising and a curiosity about this program will take you a long way. You're going to find lots of ways not to do things, but you're going to find ways that look awesome, and you're going to have like, wow, now I know how to do that. And then you got to remember how to do it. So, I've forgotten plenty of techniques that I don't bother. I go, oh, that's kind of a cool look. And then I kind of go, I've got something else to do. I'll leave it alone. And then I have to rediscover it. So if you don't be meticulous and you don't take notes or you don't save these as presets, so you don't come in here and save this as a, can you save it as a preset? Yeah, you can. You can save an animation preset, and what you're going to do is you're going to basically, whatever's been applied can be saved off as a preset for use again later on. So you have the ability to do that, and it will take all of the settings in, for I think it's for a comp. It might be for a comp or it might be for a layer. I can't remember. So for an individual layer, you should be able to save those settings off so that you can reapply them again and again and again. And that's the beginning of building your toolbox for going out on, as a journeyman and making a living at this. So that's the first step, is you got to figure out how to do something, and then you got to make it repeatable for yourself, and then it becomes part of the tools that you can come back to over and over again. Okay? All right, that's your bonus lesson. For sticking around a little bit longer, you guys got a little bit more. So, okay.
Do you have any tips on finding music that's that you can use for videos that would be legal, like any websites that can sell licenses?
Sure. So places that I've gone to for that include this one. useopen.org. It is a subscription service, but it's cheap. You basically, it's a 501c3 nonprofit. This is one type. This is classical music. If you're interested in classical music for film, this is one way to do it. Okay. And it isn't as widely used right now in the industry. One that is used widely in the industry, which I hesitate to even mention it anymore, is Incompetech.
Why hesitate to mention?
Because so many people use it now that it is, you start to hear it places. You start to hear it in lots of things.
Oh, like the music? Okay.
Yeah, so understand that it used to be that when you did these, you used to do these videos using Apple loops. So like back when Final Cut Pro was still reigning supreme, there was the sound software. They provided lots of free music, and GarageBand was the kind of the outlet for a lot of this as well. So what happened is nobody was using it like 10 years ago. And so you could put them in projects, and they were kind of like these fresh, really cool things that nobody was using, and they're really nice. And then you get about, I think it was 4 years ago, I started hearing them in video after video after video on YouTube, to now when I hear them, it's just like, oh, come on, you're not even trying. You're using Apple loops as your music source. You are so far behind the times. You are basically telling people, ignore my video. I haven't bothered to put something new and interesting on the music. So, and that's okay. I used it for podcasting. I used that music for podcasting for years.
What
So.
about Viva, WEVA? WEVA, like an association for wedding and like events.
What's that?
Called WEVA. They're like an association for wedding and event photographers. I mean, videographers.
Yeah.
They have like 300 like under the like member benefits or services.
Ew, what? But yeah, it's all going to be like music for them. What?
So it's right. So music
Licensing from APM Music. Yeah, that's fine. There's actually what's funny is that YouTube has a lot of music available for creators. So if you go in through the Creator Studio, well, this is meta because I'm currently webcasting from this account. So you do actually have a music library. So there's an audio library of free music and sound effects available to you. Okay. There's no necessarily, I think I've read through this. There's no restriction on, it doesn't have to be something you have to load to YouTube in order to use them. But they do have licensing. So there are, you do have to look into what kind of licenses are available, whether attribution is not required, which means you just use it. Attribution is required, which means you either have to mention it in your credits or you have to speak it or put it on screen somehow. And then all licenses includes commercial licensing, paying hundreds of dollars for 5 minutes of music or whatever you need. So, you know, your mileage may vary. I have not even begun to go down this road. There's a lot of stuff in here too. So it's like, and it's in typical Google form where you scroll to the bottom and then it just loads more, and you scroll to the bottom and it loads more, and you scroll to the bottom and it loads more. So there's lots in here, and you can search for it. You can kind of look for, if you know, but there's some selectors up here to help thin the herd as well. So I've not looked at the sound effects library very much. There's plenty of stuff in here though, so you can kind of go.
So what else would you use then for if you need?
What's that?
What else do you use if you need music for videos other than classical?
So they have a Foley category. So you can look through here and look through Foley, and it's going to basically bring in walking in shallow snow, sliding on leaves. So it's like, there's probably some pieces in here. Understand these are popularity, so this can be a gauge of how much it's been downloaded or listened to or used or whatever. So it's up to you. I mean, it's like you can discover as far down that as you want to go. But yeah, in terms of classical music, I've been using MuseOpen and been pretty happy with it. There's actually a fair number of actually free compositions on here done by classical composers. So these are like composers that are long dead. Their copyright is long expired. Okay, Beethoven, Brahms, all of the ones that you know. But the people who performed it also gave it to the public domain. So you don't have to license their performance of this work. You don't have to license the music because nobody owns it. It's public domain. The performance, however, if it was recent, has a copyright unless they've given it to the public domain. And in some cases they have. So you just got to keep your eye open on that because there are specific notions in there of that as well. So, you can look by the composer.
So
give me a composer right now.
Someone.
Well, but even so, aside from classical, is there anything else that you recommend?
Well, it depends on what you're into. So, Richard Strauss. So but he died relatively recently, so his copyright's actually intact. Bach. There's which Bach? There's so many.
Oh God.
So
first Bach.
All right, Johann Sebastian. So so there's a whole, and there's many pages of his works in here. Okay, so and they all have different ratings and different blah, and whether they're so that's for classical. But yes, if you're interested in something more contemporary, it's going to vary. There's no one answer for this, and that's part of it, is just having a set of sources that you can go to depending on what mood or what the project needs. So if your project says it needs to be techno, it needs to be, I want something that sounds like Dead Mouse.
It sounds like there's not really a lot of. I mean, it sounds like you have this for classical music, but there's not so many websites for otherwise for other music.
Right,
It
because
sounds like-
classical music is
Right.
music in the public domain mostly.
It sounds like that's a tricky piece of doing.
It is a tricky piece. I mean, there's plenty of garbage royalty-free sites.
Right.
Okay, I've used them.
Right.
I've never been super thrilled with them.
Right.
I've always ended up. So the other thing is that, I've worked with local musicians who can compose music,
Right.
and you pay them $100, and they can write something or modify an existing piece of theirs so that it suits the mood of what you want, and that's actually a really, really. I mean, first and foremost, it's like most composers, most folks who do music for a living are thrilled to have their work shown up on this. It's like they get a music credit in your film. They get some money. Their music gets to be played as part of this film, and it's going to be. So it's like, yeah, it's like, that's they're part of the project. It's so don't discount the notion of you don't have to go to stock sites if you can possibly find a way to just throw a few bucks at a local musician.
Right. I mean, adds a whole other layer of like effort and time. And
Of course. But I mean, or you can sit here and listen to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clips
Right.
until you find the right one.
Right.
Or you can have one conversation with somebody to get more or less exactly what you want, because you say, well, I need it to sound a little bit like this, or I need it to have this kind of mood, or it needs to use these instruments, or it needs to have this kind of. It's like you can tweak it any which way when you're working with a collaborator on the project. So don't discount the notion that you can work with somebody
That's
else.
a good idea, right?
It is. That's why I say it, is because it is a good idea. I don't often come up with good ideas, but that one's a good one.
But when you do, you drink those.
When I do, man, I milk it for everything I can. All right. Phew, man, you guys are a tough crowd. Okay, I think I'm gonna shut this thing down now. Oh God, oh no, she needs my